Under the vast Arizona sky, Sarah Matthews watched the Apache man's hands work with quiet precision. Each stake, each knot of the ceremonial tent spoke of devotion to someone unseen. For 3 days, she observed from the ridge, curiosity finally drawing her down the dusty path. He didn't startle when she approached, as if he'd known she would come. "It's beautiful," she said, gesturing to the intricately woven dwelling. "But the one you're waiting for." She hesitated. "Sometimes dreams don't find their way here." His dark eyes met hers, weathered face softening into an unexpected smile. Could it be that what he sought had already arrived? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The pencil moved across the page with practiced precision, capturing the delicate veins of a desert primrose. Sarah Matthews sat cross-legged on a sun-warmed rock, her worn leather journal balanced on her knee. The morning light cast long shadows across the Arizona landscape, painting the distant mesas in hues of amber and gold. At 38, Sarah had learned to appreciate these quiet moments. 3 years in the Arizona territory had taught her the language of solitude. It wasn't the life she'd imagined back in Boston, but after Thomas died, nothing had gone according to plan. She closed her journal and slipped it into her satchel alongside her collection tools: small glass vials, folded papers for pressing specimens, a magnifying glass, and labels pre-marked with Latin nomenclature. The University of Pennsylvania would receive another carefully documented package of botanical samples next month, evidence of her continued work despite her self-imposed exile. Rising to her feet, Sarah adjusted her wide-brimmed hat against the strengthening sun. The town of Copper Springs lay behind her, a cluster of wooden buildings and hopeful claims nestled in the valley. She preferred the view from here, close enough to civilization for necessity, far enough for peace. "Mrs. Matthews, you who?" Sarah suppressed a sigh as Eliza Winters waved frantically from the path below. The shopkeeper's wife had appointed herself Sarah's unofficial guardian, forever concerned about a widow woman all alone in such wild country. "Good morning, Eliza," Sarah called, gathering her skirts to descend the rocky slope. "You shouldn't be out here alone," Eliza scolded, fanning her flushed face. "Sheriff Miller says there's been Apache sightings near Blackwater Creek." "I'm perfectly safe," Sarah replied, the same response she'd given countless times. "It's not proper, a lady of your education living out here like some—" Eliza paused, searching for an appropriate comparison. "Like some what?" Sarah asked, unable to resist baiting the woman's propriety. "Well," Eliza sniffed, "like some botanist, I suppose." Sarah laughed then, a genuine sound that startled them both. "That's precisely what I am. Mr. Winters says the university will surely send a man to replace you soon. The university cares about accurate plant classification, not who provides it," Sarah said, though she knew Eliza's assessment held some truth. Her position remained tenuous, a favor granted to Thomas's widow rather than recognition of her own considerable knowledge. They walked together toward town, Eliza chattering about church socials and suitable widowers. Sarah nodded at appropriate intervals, her mind elsewhere. 3 days ago, from that very ridge, she'd spotted him, the Apache man building something in the distant clearing. Each day since, she'd returned to observe his methodical work. "Don't you think, Sarah?" Eliza's question pulled her back to the present. "I'm sorry, what were you saying?" Eliza huffed. "The new shipment of fabrics. Perfect for a new Sunday dress. Perhaps next month," Sarah murmured as they reached the dusty main street. Later, alone in her small cabin at the edge of town, Sarah opened her journal again. Past the botanical sketches, she turned to a new page where a different drawing took shape, the outline of a man kneeling beside a half-built structure. She hadn't meant to draw him, but her hand had moved almost of its own accord. She traced her finger over the sketch. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she would approach him, Sarah closed the journal and placed it in the drawer of her writing desk, alongside the letters from the university, the deed to the cabin, and the gold pocket watch that had stopped ticking the same moment Thomas's heart had. Some things, she had learned, couldn't be rewound. Nakohi worked with the rising sun at his back, strong hands weaving the juniper branches with practiced ease. 45 years had taught him patience, a virtue his people valued above all others. The eagle feather tucked in the band of his worn hat stirred in the gentle breeze, a reminder of the vision that had led him to this place. 5 winters ago, during his solitude in the high mountains, the eagle had come to him, not just in dreams but in the waking world. It had circled above for 3 days before dropping a single feather at his feet. That night, as he slept beneath the stars, the vision appeared. He would build a dwelling in this valley, and she would come. The army scouts who had once called him Joe would laugh to see him now, return to the old ways after years of walking between two worlds. Captain Hendricks had valued his tracking skills, his knowledge of the territory, his ability to speak the white man's tongue. But that life had hollowed him, left him a stranger to himself. Nakohi paused in his work, looking toward the ridge where the woman had watched him for 3 days. She thought herself hidden, but few things escaped his notice in this landscape he knew as intimately as the lines of his own palm. A white woman, alone on the edge of town. Unusual, brave or foolish, perhaps both. Something in the careful way she moved through the desert plants told him she was different from the others who saw only emptiness in this land teeming with life. He resumed his work, fingers moving without conscious thought. The ceremonial tent took shape slowly, each piece placed with purpose and prayer. It would be a home worthy of the one he awaited, the partner his spirit had promised would come. The sound of footsteps made him smile. She had finally found her courage. Nakohi did not look up immediately, allowing her the dignity of approach. Only when her shadow fell across his work did he raise his eyes to meet hers. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her eyes. He nodded his thanks, noting the intelligence in her gaze, the sun-touched skin that spoke of time outdoors, unusual for white women. "But the one you're waiting for." She hesitated. "Sometimes dreams don't find their way here." The words might have wounded him, from another's lips, but something in her tone held no mockery, only a gentle warning born of her own disappointments. He felt his face soften into a smile. "I am Nakohi," he said, the first words he had spoken aloud in many days. "Sarah Matthews," she replied, extending her hand in the white man's custom. He took it briefly, noting the calluses that matched his own working hands, not the soft fingers of a lady of leisure. "You build this for someone," she said. Not a question but an observation. "The one who will come." He gestured to the half-finished structure. "My vision showed me this place, this dwelling." Sarah's eyes showed skepticism, but her voice remained respectful. "And if no one comes?" Nakohi reached into his pouch and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft leather. Unwrapping it carefully, he revealed a second eagle feather, twin to the one in his hat. "For her," he explained, "when she arrives." Something flickered across Sarah's face. Not pity as he had seen from others, but a flash of recognition, perhaps even longing. "I should go," she said suddenly. Nakohi nodded. "You will return." It wasn't a question or a command, simply truth, as clear to him as the changing seasons. As Sarah walked away, Nakohi watched her figure grow smaller against the landscape. The eagle feather in his hand seemed to pulse with its own life. She would return. And perhaps the vision had been right all along, just not in the way he had understood it. The next morning, Sarah found herself returning to Nakohi's camp with her satchel of collection tools. A flimsy pretext, perhaps, but the desert verbena blooming near his clearing provided sufficient scientific justification. Nakohi looked up from his work as she approached, unsurprised by her return. He nodded toward a flat rock warmed by the morning sun, the same spot where she had secretly observed him days before. "The plants here," Sarah said, kneeling to examine a cluster of verbena. "They're different from those closer to town, more vibrant. They drink from the underground spring," Nakohi replied, his English clear and unaccented. "Water runs beneath us here." Sarah opened her notebook, making a quick sketch of the flowering plant. "You know this land well." "It knows me," he corrected gently. She glanced up, meeting his steady gaze. There was a certainty in his manner that both unsettled and fascinated her. In Boston, such talk would be dismissed as primitive superstition. But here, beneath the vast Arizona sky, the line between the rational and spiritual seemed less defined. "Your work," Nakohi said, nodding toward her journal. "You study the plants." "For the University of Pennsylvania." Sarah hesitated, then added, "I classify them, document their properties, their uses. Medicine. Sometimes." She reached into her satchel and withdrew several carefully pressed specimens mounted on thick paper with handwritten labels. "This one treats fever. This for wounds that fester." Nakohi studied the specimens, then looked up with quiet amusement. "My grandmother would say you've captured their spirits in your paper prison." Instead of taking offense, Sarah laughed. A sound she realized had become rare in recent years. Perhaps she's right. Science tries to capture what can never truly be held. Nakohi returned to his work on the tent, weaving sinew through the juniper frame with deft fingers. Sarah found herself watching his movements, the economy of motion, the reverence with which he handled each material. "Who taught you to build like this?" she asked. "My father." "His father before him." Nakohi paused. "Your husband did not teach you his craft?" The question caught her off guard. "How did you know I was married?" Nakohi gestured to her left hand where the gold band still circled her finger. "The ring. And your eyes hold memories." "He was a professor," Sarah said after a moment, "of geology. He died 3 years ago. Influenza." Nakohi nodded, accepting her loss without the awkward condolences she'd grown accustomed to in town. "And you came here." "His research brought us west initially. After he died, I couldn't bear to return east." Sarah traced the ring with her thumb, a habitual gesture. "Everything there reminded me of him." "Yet you carry reminders," Nakohi observed. Sarah closed her specimen book. "What of you? Your family?" "Scattered. Some to the reservation at San Carlos. Some to the next world." His tone remained even, but Sarah sensed the depth of loss beneath the simple statement. "I'm sorry. It is the way of things," Nakohi said. "The strong tree bends with the wind or breaks." They fell into companionable silence, each returning to their respective tasks. The sun climbed higher, and Sarah found herself reluctant to leave despite the growing heat. As if sensing her thoughts, Nakohi set aside his work and reached for a clay water jar. He poured some into a cup fashioned from a gourd and offered it to her. "From the spring," he explained. Sarah accepted the drink, surprised by its cool sweetness. "Thank you." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, a momentary contact that sent an unexpected current through her. She withdrew her hand quickly, suddenly conscious of how improper this situation would appear to anyone from town. "I should go," she said, gathering her materials. Nakohi nodded. "The plants by the eastern ridge bloom after rain. Good medicine." It was an invitation, Sarah realized, and despite every rational argument against it, she knew she would accept. The general store in Copper Springs served as the town's unofficial gathering place. Sarah pushed open the door, the bell above jingling to announce her arrival. Conversations faltered momentarily as heads turned in her direction. 3 weeks of regular visits to Nakohi's camp had given her a renewed sense of purpose. Her specimen collection had grown impressively, her notes more detailed than ever. If the university officials noticed the improved quality of her submissions, they made no mention in their correspondence. "Mrs. Matthews," Mr. Winters greeted her from behind the counter. "Your order from back east arrived yesterday." "Thank you." Sarah moved toward the counter, aware of the watchful eyes of Mrs. Peterson and Mrs. Miller, wives of the town's banker and sheriff respectively. "Awful lot of time you're spending out in those hills," Mrs. Peterson observed, her tone deliberately casual. "Found something interesting for your science work?" Sarah measured her response carefully. "Several previously undocumented plant varieties, actually. The university is quite pleased." "Herbert says he spotted you out near Blackwater Creek," Mrs. Miller interjected. "Says you weren't alone." The accusation hung in the air. Sarah maintained her composure as she examined a bolt of fabric, refusing to give them the satisfaction of her discomfort. "The local flora has many uses known to the native people," she said evenly. "Their knowledge predates our scientific classifications by centuries." "You're consorting with that Apache, then?" Mrs. Peterson's voice had lost all pretense of civility. Mr. Winters cleared his throat nervously. "Ladies, perhaps?" "It's a simple question," Mrs. Miller interrupted. "Is Mrs. Matthews seeking the company of Indians?" Sarah straightened, meeting the woman's gaze directly. "I'm conducting botanical research with the assistance of someone who knows this land intimately." "You ought to be more careful," Mrs. Miller said. "My husband says that particular Indian used to scout for the army. Can't trust a man who betrays his own kind." "Or ours," added Mrs. Peterson. Sarah gathered her packages, maintaining her dignity with effort. "I believe I can determine for myself who is trustworthy. Thank you." Outside, she took a deep breath of the dusty air. The encounter had left her shaken, though she'd anticipated something of the sort. Small towns had long memories, and Copper Springs had suffered during the Apache conflicts 20 years earlier. "Mrs. Matthews." Sheriff Miller stood beside the hitching post, thumbs hooked in his belt. A stocky man with a perpetually sunburned face, he projected an air of folksy authority that Sarah had always found slightly performative. "Sheriff," she acknowledged. "Might have a word?" He gestured toward the bench outside the barber shop. Sarah reluctantly sat, arranging her parcels beside her. "Been hearing things," Miller began, removing his hat to wipe his brow. "About you and that Apache fella." "Have you indeed?" "Now, I understand you're an educated woman with scientific interests," he continued, "but there's concerns about propriety and safety." Sarah noticed the "No Indian" sign newly posted on the saloon across the street. Similar signs had appeared throughout town recently, a response to rumors of Apache bands moving through the territory. "I appreciate your concern, Sheriff, but I assure you I'm in no danger." Miller leaned closer. "Look, Mrs. Matthews, maybe back east things are different, but out here there's history, bad blood. That Indian might seem peaceful now, but his people killed settlers not 20 miles from here. Children, too." "That was 20 years ago," Sarah said quietly. "And Nakohe wasn't part of those raids." "Nakohe, is it?" Miller's eyebrows rose. "Pretty familiar terms." Sarah stood, gathering her packages. "I'm a grown woman, Sheriff. I've survived widowhood and relocation to this wilderness. I believe I can manage my own acquaintances." "Just giving friendly advice," Miller called after her. "Wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen." The warning in his tone was unmistakable. As Sarah walked toward her cabin, she wondered if her growing friendship with Nakohe was worth the social cost. The thought of discontinuing their meetings, however, left an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. At home, she unpacked her parcels, new notebooks, inks, and the special preservative solution for her specimens. Tools of her scientific life, her rational world. Yet increasingly, it was the hours spent listening to Nakohe's stories that gave her days meaning. Tomorrow, she decided, she would go back. The town's judgment be damned. The first hint of trouble was the birds falling silent. Sarah and Nakohi had been walking along the dry creek bed, her notebook open as he identified medicinal plants used by his people for generations. The sudden quiet made Nakohi pause, his hand lifting slightly in a gesture for Sarah to stop. "What is it?" she whispered, following his alert gaze. "Listen," he replied. At first, Sarah heard nothing beyond the gentle rustle of wind through scrub brush. Then came a faint whimper, an animal in distress. Nakohi moved forward cautiously, Sarah following several paces behind. They rounded a bend in the creek bed and saw it. A coyote, its leg caught in a steel trap. The animal thrashed weakly at their approach, eyes wild with pain and fear. "Trapper's work," Nakohi said, his voice tight with disapproval. "Left to suffer." Sarah approached slowly, medical instincts overriding caution. "The leg's not broken yet, but it will be if it keeps struggling." The coyote bared its teeth, a low growl rumbling from its chest. Despite its predicament, the animal remained dangerous. "We need to sedate it somehow," Sarah said, mind racing through her botanical knowledge. "I have yarrow in my satchel and willow bark. If we could make a strong enough infusion." Nakohi was already reaching into his leather pouch. He withdrew a small bundle of dried leaves, then knelt to pick up a smooth stone from the creek bed. "Sleeping medicine," he explained, crushing the leaves against the stone. "From the purple nightshade." Sarah watched as he mixed the crushed leaves with water from his canteen in a small wooden cup. "That's belladonna, deadly nightshade. In that concentration, it could kill. If measured wrong," Nakohi agreed. "My grandmother taught me the balance between healing and harm." He approached the coyote, speaking softly in his native tongue. The animal's ears pricked forward, its growls subsiding slightly. With remarkable dexterity, Nakohi managed to pour some of the mixture into the coyote's mouth before it could snap at him. "Now we wait," he said, retreating to Sarah's side. Gradually, the coyote's struggles weakened, its eyelids drooping. When it finally lay still, breathing steadily, Nakohi moved forward to examine the trap. "Hold its muzzle," he instructed. "Gently." Sarah knelt in the dirt, cradling the coyote's head, while Nakohi worked to release the trap's mechanism. The metal jaws sprang open with a harsh clank, revealing a deep wound where they had bitten into flesh. "It needs cleaning," Sarah said, already reaching for her satchel, "and poultices to prevent infection." They worked side by side, Sarah applying her botanical knowledge while Nakohi prepared additional medicines from his own stores. Together, they cleaned the wound, applied healing herbs, and bound the leg with strips torn from Sarah's petticoat. "It will heal," Nakohi said as they finished, "if infection doesn't take hold." Sarah sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her brow. The intensity of their shared task had created a different kind of intimacy between them, the wordless understanding of two people working toward a common purpose. "In my vision," Nakohi said suddenly, "this happened." Sarah looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "The woman who would come to the tent. In my vision, we saved a wounded coyote together." His dark eyes held hers with unsettling intensity. "Just as we have done today." Sarah felt a chill despite the afternoon heat. "Coincidence," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "My people do not believe in coincidence," Nakohi replied. He reached into his pouch and withdrew a small wooden carving of a coyote. "This is for you." Sarah took the carving, its surface smooth from handling. "I don't understand." "Coyote is a transformer," Nakohi explained. "A messenger between worlds. The one who changes paths." The implication hung between them, heavy with possibility. Sarah stood abruptly, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't name. "I need to go," she said, gathering her things with unsteady hands. "It's getting late." Nakohi made no move to stop her, but his words followed as she hurried away. "The path is already changing, Sarah Matthews. For both of us. For 4 days, Sarah remained in her cabin, venturing out only to collect water from the well or exchange brief, necessary words with neighbors. She immersed herself in work, cataloging specimens, writing detailed notes, preparing samples for shipment east. Mechanical tasks that required focus but not reflection. The wooden coyote sat on her desk, watching her with carved eyes that somehow seemed to follow her movements. She had tried placing it in a drawer, but something about that felt disrespectful. Instead, it remained in view, a constant reminder of the moment everything had shifted. On the evening of the 4th day, Sarah sat at her small writing desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. "My dearest Thomas," she began, then stopped, pen hovering above the page. She had written to her dead husband many times since coming west. Letters never sent but somehow comforting in their creation. Tonight, the words wouldn't come. With a sigh, she set down her pen and moved to the window. The distant hills where Nakohi's camp lay were bathed in the golden light of sunset. Was he still working on the ceremonial tent? Still waiting for the woman of his vision? "It wasn't me, Thomas," she whispered to the empty room. "It couldn't be me." The memory of their last conversation surfaced unbidden. Thomas, his face gray with fever, gripping her hand with surprising strength. "Promise me you'll continue the work," he had said. "Promise me you won't waste your life in mourning." "I promise," she had replied, certain in that moment that she would never love again. How could she, when the best part of herself was dying before her eyes? Sarah turned from the window and lifted the small daguerreotype from her bedside table. Thomas smiled back at her. Forever 36, forever brilliant and kind, his eyes crinkling at the corners the way she had loved. "What would you think of him?" she asked the image. "This man who sees visions and speaks to the desert as if it were a living thing?" The daguerreotype remained silent, Thomas's smile unchanged. Sarah returned to her desk and pulled out the half-finished letter, staring at the 2 words she had written. With sudden decision, she crumpled the paper and tossed it into the small stove. It caught quickly, Thomas's name disappearing in flame. The wooden coyote seemed to watch the burning with approval. Sleep came fitfully that night, dreams tangling with memories. Thomas in their Boston parlor, laughing as he unpacked strange rocks from distant lands. Thomas coughing blood into his handkerchief, waving away her concern. Thomas lying still, finally, his brilliant mind quieted forever. And then, unexpectedly, Nakohi. His hands working the materials of the tent, his voice recounting ancient stories, his eyes meeting hers across the wounded coyote. Sarah woke at dawn, her decision made. She dressed carefully, choosing her most practical skirt and sturdiest boots. Into her satchel went her journal, pencils, and a small packet of dried meat and biscuits. After a moment's hesitation, she added the wooden coyote. At the door, she paused, looking back at the small cabin that had been her sanctuary and prison these past 3 years. The daguerreotype of Thomas watched from the bedside table. "I'm not replacing you," she told it softly. "I'm just continuing." The morning air held the promise of heat to come, but for now, it remained cool and sweet with sage. Sarah walked briskly, taking the now familiar path that led away from town and toward the hills. Each step felt significant, as if she were crossing a boundary more meaningful than mere distance. What would she say when she arrived? What explanation could she give for her absence, her fear? The questions tumbled through her mind, unanswered. When she crested the final rise and saw the clearing below, Sarah stopped short. The ceremonial tent stood completed, its structure elegant against the landscape. But of Nakohi himself there was no sign. A small fire smoldered near the entrance, evidence of recent presence. Sarah approached cautiously, calling his name. Only silence answered. She stood uncertainly before the tent, feeling the weight of its significance. This was what he had been building all these weeks, a dwelling for the woman of his vision. A woman who, despite her resistance to the idea, might be her. You returned. Sarah turned to find Nakohi approaching from the direction of the creek, carrying a string of freshly caught fish. His expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested he had doubted her return. I did, she replied simply, offering no explanation for her absence. He nodded once, accepting her presence without demanding justification. Hungry. Before she could answer, her stomach growled audibly. Sarah laughed, the tension between them easing. It appears so. They worked together preparing the meal, Nakohi cleaning the fish while Sarah gathered herbs growing nearby. The comfortable silence felt like a reprieve after days of internal turmoil. The tent is finished, she observed as he arranged the fish over the fire. Yes. Nakohi glanced at the structure, its intricate weaving and careful construction evident even to her untrained eye. It waited for you to see it completed. Sarah chose not to examine that statement too closely. Instead, she removed a small cloth-wrapped package from her satchel. I brought cornbread, made yesterday. Nakohi accepted the offering with a small smile. A good pairing with fish. As the fish cooked, releasing savory aromas into the air, Sarah found herself relaxing. The world here seemed simpler somehow, reduced to essential elements of food, shelter, and companionship. You've been building this tent for how long? She asked. Since the first spring flowers, Nakohi replied. For moons. And before that? I traveled. He turned the fish carefully on their wooden spits. North to the mountains, south to the desert lands, east to the great river. Looking for her? Sarah asked before she could stop herself. The woman from your vision? Nakohi shook his head. No. The vision showed me she would come here to this place. I was gathering what I needed for the dwelling. When the fish was done, he served it on broad leaves, the cornbread beside it. They ate in silence for a few moments, appreciating the simple meal. In Boston, Sarah said eventually, we would have eaten this at a table with silver forks and porcelain plates. Better tasting this way, Nakohi replied with a hint of mischief in his eyes. Sarah laughed. Perhaps you're right. She looked around the camp, noting the careful organization, the respect for the natural surroundings. Your people's ways are different from what I was taught, but I can see the wisdom in them. And I see wisdom in some of your ways, Nakohi said, surprising her. Your medicines, your books that carry knowledge across great distances and time. A fair exchange, then, Sarah said. Your knowledge for mine. Nakohi nodded. This is how it should be between peoples. After they finished eating, he gestured for her to follow him to the completed tent. Up close, she could see the intricate patterns woven into its structure. Symbols she didn't recognize but found beautiful nonetheless. May I ask what these mean? She said, pointing to a repeating design. Protection, Nakohi explained, for those who dwell within. He indicated another pattern. This speaks of harmony between earth and sky. His hand moved to a third design, and this calls for blessing from the ancestors. Sarah was struck by how different yet familiar it felt. Not unlike the stained glass windows of Boston churches, telling stories and offering protection in their own way. Will you show me inside? She asked. A moment of hesitation crossed Nakohi's face. It is tradition that only those who will dwell there enter once it is completed. I understand, Sarah said quickly, stepping back. But traditions can bend when spirits guide us to new paths. Nakohi held aside the entrance flap, inviting her in with a gesture. The interior was cool and dim, sunlight filtering through the woven walls in dappled patterns. A central fire pit was surrounded by mats of woven reeds. Bundles of herbs hung from the supports, filling the air with subtle fragrance. It's beautiful, Sarah said softly, turning slowly to take it all in. A sacred space. All dwellings should be sacred, Nakohi replied. The place where we rest, dream, share food. These are not small things. Sarah thought of her sparse cabin, functional but unloved. She had never made it truly hers, always considering it temporary despite the years that had passed. No, she agreed. They are not small things at all. There is a gathering tonight, Nakohi said as they walked along the creek bed, checking on the healing coyote. The animal had survived, though it remained wary, watching them from a distance. A medicine ceremony for a child who has been ill. Sarah had been visiting Nakohi's camp regularly for nearly 2 weeks since her return. Each day brought new discoveries, medicinal plants she'd never documented, stories that altered her understanding of the land around her, and a growing comfort in Nakohi's presence. Where? She asked, surprised. She had seen no evidence of other Apache people nearby. Beyond the western ridge, a small family group, cousins of mine. Nakohi paused, studying her face. They would welcome you if you wish to come. Sarah hesitated. Attending an Apache ceremony was worlds away from her private visits to Nakohi's camp. Yet curiosity and a desire to understand his world more fully pulled at her. Would it be appropriate? I wouldn't want to intrude on something sacred. The healing of a child concerns all people, Nakohi replied. And they know of you. That gave her pause. They know of me? A hint of amusement crossed Nakohi's face. I have spoken of the white woman who understands plants and helped save the coyote messenger. And they don't object to my presence? Some may, he acknowledged. Others are curious. The medicine man believes your knowledge could be valuable. As dusk approached, they set out together. Sarah had changed into her simplest dress, leaving behind anything that might seem ostentatious. She followed Nakohi's lead, walking silently through terrain that would have seemed impassable in the dark without his guidance. The first sign of the gathering was the rhythmic sound of a drum, its heartbeat-like cadence carrying through the night air. Then came the glow of a fire, and finally, the small encampment appeared. Several wickiups arranged in a circle around a central clearing. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. Conversations stilled as faces turned toward them, expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. A young woman drew a child closer to her side, while an elderly man spat deliberately on the ground. Nakohi spoke in his native tongue, his voice steady and dignified. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, she recognized the introduction of her name among them. An older man stepped forward, his face deeply lined, his bearing powerful despite his age. Around his neck hung an elaborately beaded medicine pouch. He studied Sarah with penetrating eyes before addressing Nakohi. Their exchange was brief. Nakohi turned to Sarah. Natsali says you may stay, but you must remain respectful and follow his guidance. I will, Sarah promised, conscious of the responsibility Nakohi had taken in bringing her here. They were led to places near the fire. Across from them sat a young boy of perhaps 6 years, his face thin and drawn. The child's mother cradled him, singing softly. Natsali, the medicine man, began preparing for the ceremony. He laid out various pouches and bundles, then produced a drum made of stretched hide over a wooden frame. The drum's surface was painted with symbols similar to those on Nakohi's tent. As the medicine man began to drum, other men joined in, creating a complex rhythm that seemed to match the beating of Sarah's own heart. Women's voices rose in harmony, words she couldn't understand but whose meaning somehow transcended language. Nakohi leaned close to explain in whispers. They sing of balance returning, of illness being carried away by the night wind. Natsali approached the sick child, holding something that smoked and released a pungent, herbal aroma. As he moved the smoking bundle over the boy's body, Sarah recognized desert sage mixed with other plants she couldn't identify. The drumming intensified. The medicine man's movements became more animated as he circled the fire, chanting in a voice that seemed to come from somewhere beyond himself. Sarah felt the rhythm entering her blood, the smoke clouding her senses. The firelight blurred, faces around her merging and shifting. For a moment, she thought she saw Thomas standing across the flames, watching her with sad eyes. Then the vision changed. She saw herself entering the ceremonial tent Nakohi had built, but she wasn't alone. A small figure held her hand, a child with features that blended hers and Nakohi's. The shock of the vision broke her trance. Sarah gasped, drawing concerned looks from those nearby. Nakohi's hand found hers in the darkness, steadying her. "What did you see?" he whispered. She shook her head, unable or unwilling to voice the impossible future that had appeared before her. "Nothing," she lied. "Just the smoke in my eyes." But the image remained, burning in her mind like an ember that refused to die. The stagecoach arrived in Copper Springs in a cloud of dust, its arrival an event that drew townspeople to the main street like moths to flame. Sarah was returning from a morning of collecting specimens when she noticed the gathering crowd. Curiosity drew her closer. A man in a crisp uniform descended from the coach, his posture military, his manner brisk. He surveyed the town with the detached interest of someone assessing property rather than greeting neighbors. "That's Lieutenant Crawford," Mrs. Winters whispered as Sarah approached. "Territorial officer from Fort Bowie." Sheriff Miller stepped forward to greet the officer, the two men shaking hands with formal cordiality. They spoke briefly before turning toward the sheriff's office, passing close to where Sarah stood. "Reports of Apache movement in the area," the lieutenant was saying. "Governor wants all settlements properly notified." Sarah felt a chill despite the warm day. She followed at a discreet distance, positioning herself near the open window of the sheriff's office while pretending to examine goods displayed outside the general store. "New regulations," Crawford's voice drifted out. "No Apache permitted within 5 miles of any settlement without proper authorization papers." "What about the peaceful ones?" Sheriff Miller asked. "Got one fellow been camping out past Blackwater Creek. Keeps to himself, former Army scout." "No exceptions," the lieutenant replied firmly. "Especially former scouts, they know our defenses, patrol routes. Could be feeding information to hostile bands." Sarah's hands tightened around her satchel. Nakohi's camp was less than 3 miles from town. "There's paper here for posting," Crawford continued. "Make sure it's prominently displayed. Any Apache found in violation is to be removed immediately." "Removed?" Miller's tone was careful. "To the San Carlos Reservation. By force if necessary." Papers rustled. "Here's the official notice. I expect full compliance, Sheriff." Sarah hurried away, heart pounding. She needed to warn Nakohi. In her haste, she nearly collided with Sheriff Miller as he exited his office some minutes later, a rolled paper in his hand. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, his expression unreadable. "Just the person I was hoping to see." Sarah composed her features. "Sheriff, heard you've been spending time out by Blackwater Creek." He didn't phrase it as a question. "My botanical research takes me in many directions," she replied evenly. Miller studied her for a moment, then unexpectedly lowered his voice. "Lieutenant's staying overnight. Won't be posting these notices until morning." Sarah stared at him, understanding the unspoken message. "That's considerate of you to mention. Just doing my civic duty, ma'am. Keeping citizens informed." He tipped his hat and moved toward the bulletin board outside the post office. Sarah wasted no time. She returned to her cabin only long enough to gather some provisions, then set out for Nakohi's camp, pushing her pace as fast as she dared. She found him mending fishing nets outside his tent, his expression brightening at her unexpected arrival. "Sarah Matthews," he greeted her. "Twice in one day is a welcome surprise." "Nakohi," she said, catching her breath. "You need to leave, at least temporarily." His hands stilled. "Why?" She explained about the territorial officer, the new regulations, the posted notices. "They'll come for you tomorrow or the next day." force you to the reservation. Nakohi listened without interruption, his face impassive. When she finished, he simply nodded once and returned to his mending. "Did you hear what I said?" Sarah asked, bewildered by his calm. "They will force you to go." "I heard." His fingers worked the nets with steady precision. "This is my place, the place the vision showed me." "Nakohi, please," she urged. "This isn't about visions. These men have guns, authority." He looked up then, his dark eyes meeting hers. "If I run, I am always running. If this is where I am meant to be, then this is where I stand." Sarah sank down beside him, frustration warring with admiration for his resolve. "They won't understand about visions or purpose. They only see—" She stopped herself. "They only see an Indian," Nakohi finished for her, "as they have always seen my people." "What will you do?" she asked quietly. "What will we do?" he corrected. "The path is now shared, Sarah Matthews." The weight of his words settled between them. He was right. The moment she had run to warn him, she had chosen a side. Her place in town, her standing, her safety, all were now compromised by her allegiance to this man. "We," she agreed softly, the decision feeling both terrifying and right. Dawn mist clung to the hills as Sarah picked her way carefully down the now familiar path to Nakohi's camp. 3 days had passed since Lieutenant Crawford's arrival, yet no soldiers had appeared to enforce the new regulations. The waiting had created its own tension, a suspended moment between what was and what would be. She found Nakohi by the creek, hands submerged in the shallow water as he worked something between his fingers. He acknowledged her approach with a slight nod but continued his task. "What are you making?" Sarah asked, settling beside him on the bank. "A gift," he replied, lifting his hands to reveal a delicate bracelet of woven plant fibers and small, polished stones. Water droplets clung to the intricate pattern, catching the morning light. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely impressed by the craftsmanship. "For you." Nakohi held it out. "The stones are from the sacred mountain to the north. They carry protection." Sarah extended her wrist, allowing him to tie the bracelet in place. His fingers were gentle against her skin, the brief contact sending warmth up her arm. "Thank you," she said softly. "I've never received anything like it." Nakohi's expression remained serious. "It marks you as a friend of my people. If trouble comes and we are separated, show this to any Apache you meet." The practical purpose behind the gift sobered her. "Has there been word from your cousins about the soldiers?" "They've moved deeper into the hills," he confirmed. "Others have been taken to San Carlos. The noose tightens." Despite the growing danger, their days had fallen into a pattern of shared work and learning. Sarah continued her botanical studies, now enhanced by Nakohi's knowledge, while he taught her skills that had sustained his people for generations. How to weave cordage from yucca fibers, how to find water in seemingly dry arroyos, how to move silently through the landscape. Today, he showed her how to fashion a small basket from split willow branches, his hands guiding hers through the unfamiliar motions. "Like this," he said, demonstrating the technique of bending without breaking the supple wood. "Feel how it wants to move." Sarah concentrated on mimicking his actions, aware of his proximity, the scent of sage and smoke that seemed to cling to him. "I never thought I'd learn such things when I came west," she admitted. "And I never thought to teach them to a white woman," Nakohi replied, amusement warming his voice. Their eyes met briefly, shared humor bridging the vast differences in their upbringings. These moments had become more frequent. Small connections, glances held a heartbeat too long, the occasional brush of hands that neither hurried to break. "In Boston," Sarah said, returning her attention to the basket, "ladies occupy themselves with needlepoint and watercolors, useful skills for attracting husbands, not for survival." "Your husband," he began carefully, "was he a good man?" The question surprised her. They had spoken around Thomas but rarely directly of him. Yes, she answered honestly. Brilliant, kind, devoted to his work. And to you. Sarah's hands stilled on the willow. In his way, the pursuit of knowledge was his first love. I understood that when I married him. Among my people, Nako, he said, a man's first duty is to see, truly see, the one who walks beside him. The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with meaning Sarah wasn't ready to examine. Tell me about your wife, she said instead, realizing she had never asked if he had been married. I had none, Nako, he replied. There was a woman once before the troubles came. Her family fled to Mexico. I never learned if she lived or died. I'm sorry, Sarah said, genuinely moved by the quiet grief in his voice. Nako, he shrugged slightly. It was not the path meant for me. They worked in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher. The half-formed basket took shape between Sarah's inexperienced fingers, imperfect but recognizable. Why did you stay? She asked suddenly. After I warned you about the soldiers. You could have gone to your cousins in the hills. Nako, he set aside his completed basket and gazed toward the ceremonial tent that had brought them together. Some things are worth standing for, Sarah Matthews, even when standing seems foolish to others. His words carried a weight that settled deep in her chest. Looking down at the bracelet encircling her wrist, the woven strands like their lives now intertwined, Sarah wondered what she herself would stand for when the moment of truth arrived, and whether she would be strong enough to face the consequences of that choice. Come, Sarah said one evening as they finished a simple meal of rabbit stew. There's something I want to show you. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the landscape in amber and gold. For nearly 2 weeks, they had alternated between Nakohi's camp and more distant locations, staying mobile to avoid the patrols that occasionally ventured beyond town limits. Tonight, Sarah led Nakohi toward her cabin on the outskirts of Copper Springs. They approached cautiously, using the cover of dusk and the scattered pinyon pines that dotted the property. Is it safe? Nakohi asked as they paused at the edge of the clearing. Sheriff Miller rides by at sunset, Sarah replied. He won't return until morning. She had come to understand the sheriff's peculiar neutrality in recent days. He enforced the letter of the law by posting notices and making required reports, but consistently found reasons to direct patrols away from where Nakohi might be found. A silent acknowledgement, perhaps, of his own misgivings about the regulations. They slipped inside the cabin, Sarah lighting a single lamp that cast soft shadows across the spare furnishings. Nakohi stood just inside the doorway, taking in this private space with respectful curiosity. Your dwelling, he observed. It holds your spirit. Sarah glanced around, seeing her home through his eyes. The neat stacks of scientific journals, the pressed plants in wooden frames, the absence of decorative touches that might have made it more conventionally feminine. It's not much, she said, but it's mine. Nakohi moved to the small bookshelf, running his fingers lightly over the leather-bound spines. Many words, he commented. Much knowledge. Academic knowledge, Sarah clarified. Your wisdom comes from life and observation. Sometimes I think that's the truer education. She crossed to the bedside table and picked up a framed portrait, the object she had brought him here to see. For a moment, she held it close to her chest, then extended it toward Nakohi. This is Thomas, she said softly. My husband. Nakohi accepted the portrait carefully, studying the face of the man captured in oils. Thomas gazed back with intelligent eyes, his expression serious but kind, his scholar's hands holding an open book. He had a good face, Nakohi said finally. Strong spirit behind the eyes. He was dying when this was painted, Sarah revealed. He knew it, though he wouldn't admit it to me, always talking about the research he would do once he recovered. She took back the portrait, gazing at the familiar features. I was in Santa Fe when the end came, collecting specimens. He had insisted I go, said he was improving. Her voice caught. I never got to say goodbye. Nakohi remained silent, allowing her story to unfold at its own pace. For 3 years, I've carried that guilt, Sarah continued, that I wasn't there, that I listened to him instead of my instincts, that I let work take precedence over what mattered most. You honored his wishes, Nakohi said quietly. There is no shame in that. Is there not? Sarah set the portrait down. I've punished myself by staying here, doing the work he would have done, living half a life, as if denying myself joy might somehow balance the scales. The admission cost her, but voicing it brought unexpected relief. She had never spoken these thoughts aloud, not even in the letters she wrote to Thomas's memory. We cannot repay the dead with our suffering, Nakohi said. It does not ease their journey. What does ease their journey, then? Sarah asked, genuinely seeking his wisdom. Living fully, carrying their memory in how we walk upon the earth. He moved to the window, gazing out at the deepening twilight. My father told me that when we honor the life we are given, we honor those who have walked before us. Sarah joined him at the window. Among your people, how long does one mourn? Until the heart heals, Nakohi replied simply. No more, no less. And has yours healed? She asked, the question escaping before she could reconsider. Nakohi turned to face her, their proximity in the small cabin suddenly intimate. It heals, he said, his dark eyes holding hers. Each day, a little more. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. Sarah became acutely aware of his presence, the warmth radiating from his body, the quiet strength in his bearing, the way his gaze never wavered from hers. For a suspended moment, she thought he might reach for her. Instead, he stepped back, respecting boundaries she herself was no longer certain she wished to maintain. We should go, he said gently. The night grows deeper. Sarah nodded, extinguishing the lamp. As they slipped back into the darkness, she felt as though something fundamental had shifted, not just between them, but within herself. They saw the storm coming from miles away, a dark wall of clouds advancing across the desert, trailing curtains of rain beneath it. Sarah and Nakohi had spent the morning checking on the healing coyote, which now moved with only a slight limp, nearly ready to return fully to the wild. We should head back, Sarah suggested, eyeing the approaching weather. I can make it to my cabin before it hits. Nakohi shook his head, studying the speed of the clouds. No time. The ceremonial tent will shelter us. The first fat drops began to fall as they hurried toward his camp, the wind rising to bend the sage and mesquite around them. By the time they reached the clearing, the sky had darkened to an ominous pewter, split occasionally by jagged lightning. Inside, Nakohi directed, holding the tent flap open as rain began to fall in earnest. The interior felt surprisingly secure, the woven walls flexing slightly with the gusting wind but holding firm. Nakohi moved with practiced efficiency, securing the entrance and checking that the smoke hole at the top remained partially covered. Will it withstand this? Sarah asked as thunder rumbled overhead. It has faced worse, he assured her, kneeling to coax the banked coals of the central fire back to life. The storm intensified, rain drumming against the tent's exterior, while wind howled through the juniper trees surrounding the clearing. Sarah sat on a woven mat, drawing her knees to her chest as lightning illuminated the interior in brief, stark flashes. A particularly violent gust shook the structure, accompanied by a sharp crack from outside. The prayer pole, Nakohi said, moving quickly to the entrance. He slipped outside before Sarah could protest. She waited anxiously, counting seconds between lightning and thunder. The storm was directly overhead now, its fury unleashed on the exposed landscape. When Nakohi hadn't returned after several minutes, she moved to the entrance, peering out into the deluge. She spotted him struggling with something at the edge of the clearing. Pulling her shawl over her head, Sarah ventured into the rain. Nakohi was attempting to secure a tall pole adorned with eagle feathers and colored cloth that had partially uprooted in the wind. As Sarah approached, a blinding flash of lightning struck a nearby pine tree with a deafening crack. The tree split, one massive branch crashing down toward them. "Look out!" Sarah cried, lunging forward to push Nakohi clear. They tumbled to the ground together as the branch crashed where he had been standing moments before. For a breathless instant, they lay tangled together on the rain-soaked earth, the shock of their narrow escape pulsing between them. Nakohi recovered first, pulling Sarah to her feet. "The tent!" he shouted over the storm's roar, pointing to where the fallen branch had clipped one side of the ceremonial dwelling, partially collapsing it. Together they rushed back, fighting wind and rain to save what they could. The damage was significant but not catastrophic. Several support poles had broken, causing one wall to sag dangerously. "Hold this," Nakohi instructed, placing Sarah's hands on a main support while he worked to splice a broken pole with sinew and rawhide from his supplies. They worked side by side for what felt like hours, soaked to the skin despite the partial shelter, hands occasionally brushing as they passed materials back and forth. Gradually, the storm's fury abated, though rain continued to fall steadily. By nightfall, they had managed to stabilize the tent's structure enough to make it safe, though one section remained open to the elements. Nakohi built up the central fire, its warmth a welcome relief after their drenching. "You should change," he said, offering Sarah a bundle of soft deerskin clothing. "The wet will bring sickness." He tactfully turned his back while she changed behind a hanging blanket, doing the same with his own rain-soaked garments. The borrowed clothing felt strange against Sarah's skin, softer than her cotton dress, molding to her body like a second skin. They sat close to the fire, the forced intimacy of their situation creating a charged silence between them. Outside, rain continued to fall, gentler now, creating a rhythmic patter against the tent walls. "You saved me," Nakohi said finally, his voice low. "The falling tree would have struck me." "You would have done the same," Sarah replied, suddenly conscious of how the firelight cast his features in warm relief. "Yes," he agreed. "Our paths are joined now, Sarah Matthews. I feel it more strongly than ever." He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and took her hand in his. The gesture was simple but profound, a crossing of boundaries both cultural and personal. "The vision has changed," he confessed. "When I first built this dwelling, I saw a faceless woman who would come. Now," he hesitated. "Now?" Sarah prompted, her heart beating rapidly. "Now I see you," he said simply. "Only you." Dawn broke clear after the storm. The desert air washed clean and fragrant with sage and damp earth. Sarah woke to find Nakohi already outside, assessing the damage to the camp in the morning light. She joined him, still wearing the borrowed deerskin clothing, her own dress hung to dry the night before. The moment between them by the fire remained unspoken but present, hovering like the mist that clung to the distant hills. Something had shifted, a boundary crossed that could not be uncrossed. "The tent can be repaired," Nakohi said as she approached. 2, perhaps 3 days of work. Sarah nodded, wondering if she should return to her cabin or stay to help. Before she could voice the question, a sharp whistle cut through the morning air, a sound distinctly human and deliberate. Nakohi tensed, motioning for Sarah to move behind him as he reached for the knife at his belt. They watched as a figure emerged from the brush at the edge of the clearing, an Apache man younger than Nakohi, his lean face marked with a jagged scar from temple to jaw. The men exchanged rapid words in their native tongue, the newcomer's manner urgent, his hands moving in quick, emphatic gestures. Several times, his gaze flicked to Sarah, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" Sarah asked when the exchange paused. What's wrong? Nakohi turned to her, his face grave. This is Haska, son of my mother's sister. He brings news from the north. Haska spoke again, extending a small leather pouch toward Nakohi. Inside was a folded piece of rawhide covered with painted symbols. A tribal message Sarah couldn't decipher. Tarak lives, Nakohi translated, his voice tight with controlled emotion. My cousin, whom we believed killed by soldiers 5 winters ago. He was taken prisoner, held at the fort near the great river. Now he has escaped and returned to our people. That's wonderful news, Sarah said, though something in both men's demeanor suggested complications beyond the simple joy of reunion. There is more, Nakohi continued reluctantly. Tarak was forced to work as a scout for the Bluecoats. He knows their plans for our people in this territory. Haska spoke again, his tone insistent. He says I must come, Nakohi explained. Tarak hides in the sacred mountains. He is wounded and asks for me by name. When would you leave? Sarah asked, a hollow feeling spreading in her chest. Now. Today. Nakohi's eyes held apology and resolve in equal measure. I must go to him. Haska watched their exchange with thinly veiled impatience, clearly eager to depart. He added something in rapid Apache, gesturing toward the north. What did he say? Sarah pressed. Nakohi hesitated. That Tarak's knowledge could save many lives. The soldiers planned to drive all Apache from these lands before the next full moon. There will be no exceptions, no peace. The implications settled over Sarah like a shadow. This was no longer about a single regulation or notice. This was about the survival of Nakohi's people. I'll come with you, she said impulsively. Haska's reaction was immediate and negative, a burst of words that needed no translation. It's not possible, Nakohi said gently. The journey is difficult, dangerous, and you are needed here. Here? For what purpose? To be our eyes in the town, he explained. To listen, to watch for troop movements. This knowledge could save lives. Sarah wanted to argue but recognized the logic in his words. Still, the thought of his departure, possibly permanent, created a physical ache beneath her ribs. Will you return? She asked, not caring that Haska could hear the emotion in her voice. If it is possible, Nakohi answered honestly. But the path ahead is clouded. He moved to the tent and retrieved something wrapped in soft leather. Unwrapping it, he revealed the second eagle feather, the one he had been saving for the woman of his vision. Take this, he said, pressing it into her hands. It will connect us across distance. Sarah accepted the sacred object, understanding its significance. How long will you be gone? I cannot say. Tarak's condition, the soldier's movements, these will determine much. His hand lingered on hers. Sarah Matthews, you have changed my vision in ways I never expected. Whatever comes, remember this. Haska made a sound of impatience, already backing toward the trees. I must go, Nakohi said. Watch for signs. If I can send word, I will. Before Sarah could respond, he had gathered his few essential belongings. A knife, a small medicine pouch, a water skin. No prolonged farewell, no promises she knew he might not be able to keep. Be safe, she managed to say. His eyes held hers one last time, conveying what words could not. Then he was gone, following Haska into the brush, leaving Sarah alone beside the storm-damaged tent that had drawn them together. 3 days after Nakohi's departure, Sarah forced herself to return to town. The ceremonial tent stood partially repaired. She had worked on it each day, following the techniques he had taught her, unwilling to leave it damaged and vulnerable to the elements. The physical labor had provided some distraction from the hollow ache of his absence. Copper Springs greeted her with unusual activity. A group of men gathered outside the sheriff's office, their voices carrying across the dusty main street. Sarah recognized several local ranchers and miners among them, many armed with rifles propped casually against their shoulders. "Mrs. Matthews," Sheriff Miller called as she passed, breaking away from the group. "Thought you might have left town." "Just busy with my research," she replied carefully. "What's happening here?" Miller's weathered face tightened. "Trouble brewing. Word came from Fort Bowie about Apache raiders hitting settlements north of here. Armies stretched thin, so we're organizing a town militia." Sarah's heart sank. "Raids? Are you certain?" "Lieutenant Crawford confirmed it himself," Miller said. "Burned homesteads, stolen livestock. They're moving south through the territory." Sarah thought of the message Haska had brought, the soldiers' plans to drive all Apache from these lands. How convenient that raids would justify such action. "Perhaps it's misunderstanding," she suggested, "or isolated incidents rather than organized." "Mrs. Matthews," Miller interrupted, his tone hardening, "I understand you've developed certain sympathies, but these are facts. The Apache are on the warpath again." Beyond the sheriff, Sarah noticed Mr. Winters emerging from his store, a rifle in his hands. The weapon appeared new, its wood stock gleaming in the sunlight. "Where did all these guns come from?" she asked. "Army supply wagon came through yesterday," Miller explained. "Lieutenant Crawford arranged for us to purchase what we needed for town defense." The pieces aligned with disturbing clarity. Create fear, arm the settlers, provoke confrontation. A familiar pattern in the territory's troubled history. "Sheriff, please consider that escalating the situation might be exactly what." "That'll be enough, Mrs. Matthews." Miller cut her off, glancing back at the watching men. "I'd advise you to keep such thoughts to yourself. Town's on edge." As if to emphasize his point, a shot rang out from the direction of the saloon, a man demonstrating his marksmanship to approving shouts from his companions. Sarah continued to her cabin, anxiety building with each step. She needed to warn Nakohi, but had no way to reach him. The eagle feather he had given her rested in a small wooden box beside her bed, a connection that offered spiritual comfort but no practical communication. That evening, a knock at her door startled her from restless sleep. She opened it to find Sheriff Miller on her porch, his expression grim. "May I come in?" he asked, removing his hat. Sarah hesitated, then stepped aside. Miller entered, declining her offer of coffee with a shake of his head. "I'll be direct, Mrs. Matthews. Your association with that Apache has been noted by several townspeople. In ordinary times, I'd say it's your business. These aren't ordinary times." "What exactly are you saying, Sheriff?" Miller sighed. "I'm saying that for your own safety, you need to remain in town for the foreseeable future. No more excursions to Blackwater Creek or beyond." "You're placing me under house arrest?" Sarah asked incredulously. "Think of it as protective custody," Miller countered. "Things could get ugly fast. Some folks are suggesting your Apache friend might be feeding information about town defenses to the hostiles." "That's absurd," Sarah protested. "Nakohi wants peace, not conflict." "Maybe so," Miller allowed. "But perception matters more than truth right now. I've posted a deputy outside to ensure your safety." After he left, Sarah moved to the window. True to his word, a young deputy lounged against the porch railing, a loaded rifle across his knees. Not just protection, surveillance. She retreated to her desk and opened the drawer where she kept Thomas's gold pocket watch. Beside it now lay Nakohi's eagle feather and the coyote carving he had given her. Totems of a life that had expanded beyond anything she could have imagined when she first arrived in the territory. On an impulse, Sarah removed a small leather pouch from her specimen collection. Inside were seeds she had gathered with Nakohi, desert plants that thrived in the harshest conditions, persisting when all else withered. She would need their resilience in the days ahead, for she had no intention of remaining passive while forces beyond her control determined Nakohi's fate, and perhaps her own. Sarah waited 3 nights for the perfect opportunity. The young deputy, Billy Hansen, had developed a predictable pattern, checking her windows at dusk, then retreating to the porch where he inevitably dozed by midnight. Tonight, a new element worked in her favor. A poker game at the saloon had drawn extra attention, the sounds of revelry carrying through town. She dressed methodically in her most practical clothing, sturdy boots, dark skirt, and the leather vest she used for fieldwork. Into a small pack went essentials: dried meat and cornbread, water canteen, flint and steel, a small knife, and her precious compass. The compass had been Thomas's, a precision instrument from Switzerland with a polished brass case that opened to reveal a delicately balanced needle. It had guided his geological expeditions across 3 continents. Tonight, it would guide her to the sacred mountains where Nakohi had gone. Sarah slipped the eagle feather into her breast pocket, close to her heart. Finally, she penned a brief note for Sheriff Miller, not explaining her destination, merely assuring him she had left voluntarily and would return when she could. The back window offered the quietest exit, its wooden frame sliding open with only the faintest creak. Sarah lowered herself into the darkness, pausing as Deputy Hansen's snore hitched before resuming its steady rhythm. She kept to shadows, working her way behind buildings until she reached the edge of town. Only then did she risk taking out the compass, its needle catching moonlight as it swung to find north. Nakohi had once pointed to the sacred mountains, a dark silhouette against the northern sky. She would find them and him. The night desert was another world, alive with sounds and movements invisible by day. Coyotes called in the distance, their yips and howls carrying on the cool air. Sarah thought of the injured coyote they had saved together, wondering if it now ran with its pack again, whole and free. By dawn, she had covered several miles, the town nothing but a smudge on the southern horizon. She rested briefly in the shade of a sandstone outcropping, rationing her water with care. The mountains looked no closer, their blue-gray mass still intimidatingly distant. The second day brought harsher terrain, rocky arroyos and steep ravines that forced detours and slowed her progress. The desert sun beat down mercilessly, and Sarah found herself drawing on Nakohi's teachings: which plants held moisture, how to find shade, when to move and when to rest. By late afternoon, exhaustion and thirst had begun to take their toll. Her water was running dangerously low, and the mountains still loomed distant. Doubt crept in. Had she been foolish to attempt this journey alone? Without Nakohi's knowledge of the land, would she simply become another casualty of the unforgiving desert? As the sun began its descent, Sarah spotted movement on a ridge above her, a human figure watching her progress. Her heart leapt, then fell. Not Nakohi's familiar silhouette, but someone else, smaller, more wiry. She froze, uncertain whether to call out or seek cover. The figure made the decision for her, descending the ridge with surprising speed and grace. As he drew closer, Sarah recognized the jagged facial scar. Haska, Nakohi's cousin who had delivered the message. His approach was wary, one hand resting on a knife at his belt. He stopped several paces away, studying her with undisguised suspicion. "Nakohi," Sarah said, the only word she knew would bridge their understanding. Haska's expression shifted slightly at the name. He gestured to the eagle feather visible in her pocket, then made a questioning motion. Sarah withdrew the feather carefully. "Nakohi gave this to me. I need to find him." Comprehension dawned in Haska's eyes, though his suspicion remained. He gestured for her to follow, then turned back toward the ridge. Sarah hesitated only briefly before falling in step behind him. Whether he led her to Nakohi or into danger, this was the path she had chosen. They traveled until nightfall, Haska setting a pace that challenged Sarah's endurance. When they finally stopped to rest, he shared water from his own canteen but maintained a careful distance, watching her with eyes that missed nothing. In the darkness, he spoke, a single word that Sarah recognized from Nakohi's teachings: "Why?" The simplicity of the question belied its complexity. Why had she come? Why risk everything to follow a man from a world so different from her own? Why involve herself in a conflict that had raged for generations before her arrival? Sarah touched the compass at her belt, then placed her hand over her heart. Some things required no translation. Haska studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Neither approval nor acceptance, but acknowledgement of her determination. He pointed ahead to where the mountains rose black against the star-filled sky. "Tarak," he said. "Nakohi." One more day's journey, Sarah understood. One more day to reach the man whose vision had somehow come to include her, and to face whatever awaited them both in those ancient hills. Dawn painted the sacred mountains in hues of amber and gold as Haska led Sarah up a narrow trail invisible to untrained eyes. They had traveled through the night, stopping only briefly for water and rest. Now, as they climbed higher, Sarah felt a strange tension in the air, as if the land itself held its breath in anticipation. They crested a ridge to find a small plateau nestled between towering rock formations. Several Apache families had made camp here, their temporary dwellings blending into the natural landscape. Children stilled their play at Sarah's approach. Women paused in their work, and warriors reached instinctively for weapons. Haska spoke rapidly in his native tongue, explaining her presence. Though the words were incomprehensible to Sarah, she recognized Nakohi's name repeated several times. Gradually, the hostility in the air lessened, though wariness remained. An elderly woman approached, her face deeply lined by sun and time, her bearing dignified despite stooped shoulders. She studied Sarah with keen eyes before speaking to Haska, who translated haltingly. "Grandmother says you carry Nakohi's feather. This makes you—" He searched for the word. "Connected, but not trusted. Not yet." "I understand," Sarah replied. "Where is he?" Haska gestured toward a dwelling set slightly apart from the others. Outside it, deep in conversation with another man, stood Nakohi. Sarah's heart leapt at the sight of him. Alive, whole, his familiar profile outlined against the morning sky. He turned as if sensing her presence, disbelief crossing his features before recognition dawned. In 3 long strides, he reached her, stopping just short of an embrace that would have been inappropriate before his people. "Sarah Matthews," he said, her name carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken questions. "How did you come here?" "I followed," she said simply. "There's trouble in town. Armed men talk of raids. I feared what might happen." The man who had been speaking with Nakohi approached, taller, broader, with an intensity that seemed to radiate from him like heat from stone. A healing wound crossed his shoulder, still red and angry against copper skin. "Tarak," Nakohi introduced him. "My cousin." Tarak regarded Sarah with open suspicion. "The white woman brings news of armed men," he said in surprisingly good English. "News we already know." "She risked much to come here," Nakohi countered. "Her warning comes from concern." Their exchange was interrupted by a commotion at the edge of the plateau. A young Apache scout arrived, breathing hard from fast travel, delivering news that sent a ripple of tension through the gathered people. "What is it?" Sarah asked. "Bluecoats and town men," Nakohi translated grimly. "Moving this way. Many guns." Tarak barked orders, warriors immediately beginning to prepare for either defense or evacuation. Women gathered children and essential belongings, their movements efficient despite the alarm. "They followed you," Tarak accused Sarah, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. "No," she insisted. "I was careful. The town has been tracking Apache movement for days," Nakohi explained more calmly. "Sheriff Miller is no fool. He would have guessed where you might go." A young warrior ran up with a small cloth bundle, offering it to Tarak. He unwrapped it to reveal a white cloth, a flag of truce. "They send this ahead," the warrior explained. Ask for talk, not fight. Tarak scoffed. White man's talk comes before white man's bullets. Always. Nakohi took the flag, considering it. Who leads them? Sheriff from the town. Army officer. 20, maybe 30 men. Sarah stepped forward. Let me go to them. I know Miller. He's a reasonable man beneath his bluster. No, Tarak said flatly. They will use you against us. Or I could prevent bloodshed, she countered. At least let me try. Nakohi and Tarak exchanged words in Apache, their discussion intense but brief. Finally, Nakohi turned to Sarah. We will go together, he decided. Show both sides there can be understanding between our peoples. A foolish risk, Tarak warned. Perhaps, Nakohi agreed. But the greater risk is in bullets that cannot be called back once fired. They descended the trail together, Sarah, Nakohi, and for warriors including Tarak, the white flag held aloft. Below, on a broad shelf of land, waited the men from Copper Springs and soldiers from Fort Bowie, rifles gleaming in the morning light. Sheriff Miller stepped forward as they approached, his face registering surprise at Sarah's presence. Behind him stood Lieutenant Crawford, his uniform crisp despite the journey, his expression cold and calculating. Mrs. Matthews, Miller called. You're unharmed. Of course I am, Sarah replied, moving to stand between the two groups. These people have shown me nothing but respect. Step aside, ma'am, Crawford interrupted. We have orders to remove all hostiles from this territory. There are children here, Sarah protested. Families seeking only peace. Peace, Crawford laughed shortly. After the raids on northern settlements? What raids? Nakohi asked, stepping forward. My people have been here, preparing to move deeper into the mountains away from your towns. Tarak spoke rapidly in Apache, and Nakohi's expression hardened as he translated. My cousin says there were no Apache raids. He was held at your fort. He heard your officers planning to blame Apache for attacks your own men would carry out. Crawford's hand moved to his pistol. That's a damnable lie. 3 months later, Sarah stood back to examine their work. The ceremonial tent gleamed in the late afternoon light, fully restored and enhanced from its storm-damaged state. The final touches, intricate weavings along the entrance flap, had been completed that morning. It's perfect, she said as Nakohi joined her, his hand finding hers with the easy familiarity that had grown between them. Not perfect, he corrected gently, but strong. It will endure, like so much else that had seemed impossible on that tense morning in the sacred mountains. Sarah still marveled at how events had unfolded after Crawford's angry denial. It had been Sheriff Miller, surprisingly, who prevented bloodshed. When Crawford had drawn his pistol, Miller had stepped between the lieutenant and Tarak, demanding evidence of the alleged raids beyond the Army's reports. I sent riders to verify those attacks myself, Miller had revealed. Found burned homesteads right enough, but no Apache signs, and witnesses who described soldiers, not warriors. The standoff that followed had been tense, Crawford ordering his men to arrest the Apache group, Miller countermanding those orders, the town militia split in their loyalties. In the end, what tipped the balance was the arrival of a territorial judge who had been summoned days earlier by a prescient Miller. Judge Carlton had the authority to investigate Crawford's claims and, more importantly, to protect the Apache group until that investigation was complete. The inquiry had revealed the truth. A coordinated effort by certain Army officers and land speculators to drive the Apache from territories rich in mineral deposits. Crawford now awaited trial in Tucson, his career and freedom forfeit to his greed. You're thinking of that day again, Nakohi observed, reading her expression. It could have ended so differently, Sarah acknowledged. The path unfolds as it must, he replied, the philosophy that had guided him through years of waiting for her. Much had changed since that confrontation. Judge Carlton had established a precedent-setting agreement, a small reservation of protected land around the sacred mountains, with Nakohi's people serving as official guides and interpreters for the territorial government. Not ideal, but far better than forced removal or bloodshed. Copper Springs had changed too. With Turok's knowledge of mineral deposits proving accurate, the town had grown as new mines opened. But unlike earlier boomtowns, this prosperity came with negotiated agreements ensuring the Apache people shared in the benefits. Sarah had found her own role transformed, no longer merely documenting plants for distant academics, but teaching practical medicine that combined her scientific knowledge with Apache healing traditions. Her small school now welcomed students from both communities. And then there was the ceremonial tent, restored and standing on the same spot where she had first encountered Nakohi building it for his envisioned future. "Do you remember what you said that first day?" she asked. "About building this for the one who would come?" Nakohi smiled, the expression transforming his solemn features. "I remember a woman who told me dreams don't always find their way here." "I was wrong," Sarah admitted, leaning against his shoulder. "No," he countered. "You spoke truth as you knew it then, but truth changes as we change." From the direction of the creek came laughter, Turok's son playing with several children from town, their differences momentarily forgotten in the universal language of childhood games. The sound symbolized the fragile peace they had all worked to build. "It won't be easy," Sarah said, "not for the first time. There will always be those who fear what's different, who see only what separates us." "Yes," Nakohi agreed. "But now there are also those who see what connects us." He led her toward the tent's entrance, pausing before the opening. "Among my people, when a dwelling is completed, those who will live there enter together, bringing only what matters most." Sarah understood. She removed Thomas's watch from her pocket, no longer worn but carried as a respectful memory. Nakohi held the eagle feather that had once been in his hat. Together, they placed these symbols of their past selves just inside the entrance. "What matters most is already here," Nakohi said softly. Sarah felt the truth of his words as they ducked through the entrance together. Inside, the filtered sunlight created patterns across the earthen floor, like the dappled path that had led her to this unexpected life. The ceremonial tent had been built for a dream, a vision of someone who would come. Neither of them could have imagined how that vision would materialize, through storm and threat, across cultural divides, despite all that should have kept them apart. As Nakohi kindled the first fire in their shared dwelling, Sarah realized some dreams find their way not because of careful planning or blind faith, but through the courage to recognize them when they appear in unexpected forms. Like a woman stumbling upon a man building a tent for his future love, and the story neither of them saw coming but both were meant to build.